Right away.
Thank you, Phil and Al, for putting all this together for us. This is a wonderful conference on advancing the culture of life. You know, Phil was lamenting that with so many wonderful issues and capable speakers that he didn't have a bigger crowd. But I remind you, Phil, our Lord only started with 12. So, and however many, we'll never know however many he asked. So we're very glad that y'all are here.
The ones who are here are meant to be here.
Exactly, exactly. Well, I was invited here to talk to you about denial of treatment issues, medical ethics issues, and what we call futilitarian ethics. Texas actually has the worst law in the nation on the books about patients' rights and who decides how your medical treatment will or will not continue. But what we've seen in Texas, in the church and in the Capitol and in our own hospitals, represents what is actually a global problem across the medical community. There's a raging war in the Vatican and in hospitals and in the medical community across the globe about who has the say about when a person should or should not die or receive medical treatment. So this is not just a Texas problem. Euthanasia, and we use the term, we call these sins or these assaults on life what they are. This is not death with dignity. This is not ending a person's suffering. This is euthanasia. This is murder. It's not only a problem in every Texas hospital, nursing facility, and care center. These are problems in every facility in America. The futilitarians, because people's lives are considered futile, the futilitarians have creeped into every medical institution. And they make judgments. These are arbitrary judgments about a person or a patient's quality of life. We hear statements such as, life-sustaining medical treatment is more of a burden than a benefit. But we as pro-lifers ask, burden to whom? Because the patient is the one who should be deciding what type of burdens or inconveniences he or she will accept. When a person's quality of life is too low, according to some, he or she no longer merits further attention, care, or treatment. But again, we ask, too low quality of life according to whom? A life that is a burden on a family or society should not be prolonged. Well, isn't that our choice? Don't we decide that? The Texas Advanced Directives Act, that's found in Chapter 166 of the Texas Health and Safety Code. It's about this 4 paragraphs long, and it puts you in danger anytime you enter a Texas hospital. The law allows doctors and hospitals to withdraw medical treatment, including food and water, from you and from your loved ones, even against your wishes. If your wishes have been spelled out in an advanced directive, if you are conscious, awake, and telling the doctor you want medical treatment, he can tell you, no, we're going to remove your care in 10 days. This is real, this happens, and I'm going to tell you some of the patients who have gone through this process. What happens, though, is that these doctors will consider your quality of life and say you have no hope of meaningful recovery. And when we started realizing the shortcomings in the Texas law, we started to research. And we have found that ample, peer-reviewed, published literature from across the country shows providers' providers and facilities' lack of willingness to follow your advanced directive when you are asking for continued care. If you're exercising patient autonomy and wanting to die and refuse treatment, they're happy to comply. But if you're asking for continued treatment against the wishes of the facility or care provider, the facility's lack of willingness to provide your care is well documented, and we've seen there are a number of medical journals who have done studies on that. Under the Texas law, what happens is once the decision is made and then rubber stamped by a futility review committee, the patient or family has only 10 days to find a transfer to another facility. or to another physician. 10 days, and that includes Saturdays and Sundays. Neither physician nor the facility is obligated to treat the patient after the 10th day, which can and has led to the death of the patient. Rarely are transfers completed within the 10-day allotment. This Texas law and other similar laws foster these quality of life decisions. They foster the assaults on life that we heard Bishop Cressida speak of this morning. The judgment has shifted away from medical treatment that is futile to the patient's quality of life being rendered futile. Pope John Paul II, who is now St. John Paul II, warned that excessive preoccupation with efficiency is unjust, and of course we would think this excessive preoccupation with efficiency is incompatible with the pro-life mission. Although we in Texas are the envy of pro-lifers nationwide, we are also home to several expansive multi-gajillion-dollar medical complexes. And Houston is the home to one of the largest medical centers in the world. In 1997, the medical lobby brought a bill to then Governor Bush that allowed no notice. They had passed a bill that provided some type of discussions within 72 hours, and then the patient's treatment could be removed. And the discussion was among the facility and the caregivers. Well, Governor Bush vetoed that bill at the request of our beloved and belated Dr. Graham, our president. As a result of the veto in 1999, the medical people and the futilitarians were trying again, and Governor Bush instructed them, you need to get Right to Life on board before I'm going to cooperate or sign anything. Well, when a governor asks you, sort of compels you into negotiations, you'd best work out some type of negotiation, because the other side can then say, we met with them for 2 years and they won't budge. And so we were quite naive at the time. Through 2 years of bloodletting, vicious negotiations, the best that we could do was 10 days. And in these meetings, we were told this would never happen to a conscious patient. We just need some type of procedure in law so that we as providers can get out of a bad situation when the family's unreasonable. Anyway, the discussions were horrible, straight out of Dachau Nazi medicine. We had no idea at the time the applications of the law. And so 10 days was the best that we could get in 1999, and that's called the Texas Advanced Directives Act. And it's in law in our Health and Safety Code. It's the worst law in the nation because just before the 10-day part, there's a safe harbor that provides immunity, which is the largest immunity blanket for any act of any law in our country. It's more immunity than criminals have, it's more immunity than teachers and clergy have, but hospitals and doctors who are acting under the Texas Advanced Directive Law have the most legal safeguards for withdrawing a patient, which we would recognize as speeding the death of a patient. The Texas law does the following. Authorizes providers to override and ignore a patient's wishes, surprises families with 48 hours of this futility review meeting, which we would consider a death panel. We've actually been criticized for using the term death panel, but we don't really know what else to call a committee of people who are on the hospital payroll who decide whether you live and die. Oh, and they never really decide that you get to continue living. So we kind of think that's a death panel. Empowers an unchecked and unaccountable committee. This 10-day law thrusts families into a 10-day frenzy, so instead of being at the bedside, nurturing, loving, supporting each other as they're going through this healthcare crisis in their family, they're ripped away from the bedside, thrown into a bureaucratic web and a legal mess of how to fight for the life of their loved one against the people who just maybe 9 days ago were caring for their loved one. The law provides no directions for judges. The law grants complete immunity to the providers. And the law jeopardizes everyone. There are no patient qualifiers in the law. So some will say, well, this would only happen to patients who are near death, or this would only happen to patients who are unconscious, irreversible, terminal, no hope of meaningful recovery. Well, that's not true. There are no patient qualifiers in the law. We are all at risk, every single person in this room. If you go to a hospital and a doctor or hospital decides that your quality of life is too low, maybe because you're wearing the wrong color tie, or maybe because you can't pay, or maybe because you can't move one leg, but for any reason, the law does not specify what type of patient can have treatment withdrawn. So we are all at risk. I'm not exaggerating. This is Texas law and it happens. My staff and I have seen futilitarianism in practice. The patients we've helped are about over 150. And when the families are given 48 hours notice, which means they're told in 48 hours, we recommend, or actually the term is we invite you to come to this meeting, and we're going to talk about continuing care for your loved one. But they're talking about stopping that continuing care. So you're told, you're invited to come to this meeting in 48 hours. And when you're invited to this meeting, you're given some paperwork that says, we're having this meeting because you've requested care that we think is inappropriate. And at the end of the paperwork is given a registry of folks who have signed up to help families navigate this transfer process and to understand the law. There are a few attorneys, a doctor or two, and Texas Right to Life is on this list. And so sometimes families call us right when they're given the 48 hours notice of the meeting, so then we can accompany them to the meeting or kind of tell them this is what to expect, here's what you should ask, or they didn't follow the law so they can't have the meeting. Sometimes people call us at the 9th of the 10th days, and then of course we drop our lives to try and help the patient. So the meeting happens 48 hours after that. Invariably, the meetings are 4 o'clock on Friday. Because why? Because at 5 o'clock on Friday, the facilities give the families the letter that says you have 10 days. Well, you know, medical records and doctors and nurses and judges and lawyers, they're not real happy to take on a new issue at 5:30 on Friday. So by the time the families know what's happening, you've burned Saturday and Sunday of the clock and you're starting over on Monday. And now you're down to 7.5 days of the 10-day clock. Some dangers of this policy and futilitarian ethics are that we claim or we hear families who want life-sustaining medical treatment for their loved one are selfish or overly emotional. For example, Jahai McMahon's family. Well, guess what? They said she was brain dead, and the family didn't believe it, and now she's beginning to show signs that she's recovering. Well, are they overly emotional because they were so attached to their 15-year-old girl who just had a tonsillectomy? There's a family who was in the news several years ago, the Habtegaris family. They were African, and they had a different cultural and a different religious background, and because of that, Baylor in Dallas said they were unreasonable, they wouldn't work with her, and they made a move to remove their sister, who had cancer, terminal cancer, from life-sustaining medical treatment, and the facility considered the family unreasonable because of their cultural and religious differences. Even when medical mistakes are made, the Texas law provides shelter for following the statutory procedure. For example, a patient named Deb, sadly, was at St. Joseph's, a then Catholic hospital in Houston, and she was in the hospital, and she was left without oxygen. She was oxygen dependent, and then somehow her oxygen went off. She suffered a stroke, which is a medical malpractice mistake, because when you're in the hospital and you're on oxygen, you should be monitored, and if your tank goes off, there should be whistles and bells. No one went in to see her. She had a stroke, she fell unconscious, and that mistake was covered because the facility started the 10 days to get rid of the evidence. The law promotes class warfare based on cost. Martha, a lady in Fort Worth, had no insurance, and she was pretty sick. She probably wasn't going to recover, but she certainly was going to last longer than 10 days, but this facility started the 10 days because she had no insurance. The law also robs patients of their autonomy to direct their own care. And Andrea Clark was a case in 2006. She was in Houston. Her case was well publicized because the family picketed outside St. Luke's Medical Center. She was in and out of consciousness, but when she was conscious, her family said what was happening. She turned red, her heart started racing, she broke into a sweat, and they said, "We'll get the nurses, write out a note." She wrote out a note, "I want to live." And they still tried to kill this woman by removing her treatment. Now, a side note, since we're at a Catholic conference, I will tell you what happened is the facility went through such bad press, and we knew a family doctor who was a Catholic, and I shared with him what was happening, and he said, "Well, I'm not sure what I can do, but use me as a last resort." Well, of course, we're always at the last resort in these cases. My husband and I were we were leaving town. We were on a shuttle bus at Intercontinental Airport in Houston, from the the parking place to the terminal. Just he and I, the driver, and this woman, who we didn't know. She's on her phone, and we hear this. It's so amazing how God is so smart. We hear this. It's on, and she's complaining. It's on pro-life something or other.org. Tell Dr. So-and-so he doesn't have to help in this case. The woman is sick. She's going to die. They don't need to help with this Andrea Clark. And we had been helping Andrea Clark, I don't know, it had been like 4, maybe 3 weeks. And I thought, wow, this is weird. You know, all the 8 million people in Houston on this one bus at this one time, on this one day, it's the attorney for the hospital who's trying to kill this woman. So, what was happening at the time was our doctor, Dr. Matthew Lenz, a very fine Catholic physician in Houston, father of 8, prays outside of abortion clinics, was a wonderful human. He was willing to accept Andrea under his care. And he was trying to put together a team of specialists to help him care for Andrea. And so he had been calling doctors, asking them if they would join the treatment team. And so this doctor apparently had called St. Luke's risk management saying what's happening. And St. Luke's behind the scenes was telling doctors not to help Dr. Lenz care for this woman. Now what happened is Dr. Lenz was able to take Andrea into his care at the last minute and spare her from death by dehydration, starvation, and all the other horrible ways that she would have died. Andrea, when he went to visit her, her family had said, you know, we're not sure if she's a practicing Catholic, but she did convert at some point. And so Dr. Lenz brought a priest into her. And in a moment of consciousness, she went to confession, received the Eucharist, and died 24 hours later. So when we speed the death of patients, whether that's because of our own family sadness, because we feel burdened, or because we devalue a person's life, we actually are cutting them off from a chance to come to grips with their salvation, or to accept Christ, or to return to Christ. And so that's just one beautiful, very beautiful story, tragic way of how Andrea died and how her family laid her to rest, but still, had we not given her that extra 6 or 7 weeks, that may have had eternal consequences, which is very, very tragic. And her family was not a family of believers. They were not converts. They did not know the Lord. But for some reason, the Holy Spirit spoke to them, and they were able to share that with Dr. Lenz, who was able to prepare her to meet the Savior. Andrea's case is just one example, but when we look at Terry Schiavo's situation, you know, her dad, Terry's dad, who we lost 2 years after Terry, fell ill because he stood outside of her nursing home. God knows for how many days, how many hours around the clock. And that had long-term physical consequences for him and his health. Many times families don't understand what the caregivers are telling them, and they are completely perplexed when the doctor And nurses who were talking to them on Tuesday have suddenly changed their tune. On Wednesday, there was a Vietnamese man whose wife was in the hospital. The husband spoke very little English, and he just kept asking, why have you changed? Why have you changed? Why won't you treat my wife? You were treating her yesterday. And because of the culture and language barrier, there was no communication. All he could do was just understand that they were going to kill his wife in 10 days. Emilio, who was a 17-month-old baby in Austin, what was it? Children's Hospital in Austin. Children's Hospital of Austin. Now, Emilio was born very, very ill. He was born with a congenital problem. He probably was never going to be a typical child who could walk or talk or eat. But that does not mean we kill him or we don't give him every benefit. Emilio felt very ill at home. He was taken to the hospital. This was in 2007. In February, the mother, Katerina, and Katerina was a handful. Mind you, she was not an easy family member with whom to deal. Nonetheless, we probably would not be easy when we're talking about protecting the lives of our 17-month-old. So Emilio was in the hospital. Katerina was given the letter. She called an attorney who was on the list. To make it long story short, we went to the futility review meeting with Katerina. Now, Katerina was not well educated. She was probably not very sophisticated, but she could understand what was happening to her son. We went into this futility review meeting, which was a death panel, not knowing what to expect. 23 people were at this meeting waiting for this one woman. 23 people. They were well credentialed. They were in white coats and ties. They were doctors, nurses, of course, a pastor or clergy, and other credentialed people who were all on this committee who were going to bully Katerina into ending the life of her son. Well, we had 7 with us against their 23. But can you imagine had Katerina gone by herself with just her sister who was a sweet little nurse who was trying to dissect all this? Well, what happened at the end of that, our president, Dr. Graham, was with us, and he had completely turned the meeting to our side. He kept asking questions in his professorial, Socratic manner with love, which is what we have to do in the pro-life movement. We always have to speak the truth in love, because no one speaks to an angry messenger. As infuriating as this movement can be, we have to speak in love. I can see my husband over there raising his eyebrows like, do you really believe that? Nonetheless, in the pro-life movement, not necessarily in our own homes, we speak the truth. We speak the truth in love. But in this meeting, Dr. Graham had brought these 23 people who were so hardened, into saying, well, don't we want Emilio to live? Don't we want this problem to go away? Certainly we don't want to be accused of, starving this poor child. And sure, we know he might never be conscious again, but, aren't most toddlers who are dirtying their diapers and drooling, they're not really dignified anyways, even when they are running around and playing. And all the people in the room were like, yeah, that's true, toddlers aren't very dignified. And so we don't really need to talk about Emilio's loss of dignity. He's 17 months old. And so the meeting, they were all kind of, yeah, you're right. And we don't really know if he's suffering because you have him so sedated, right? Well, yes, he is on a lot of sedation. And so systematically, Dr. Graham was able to dismantle this committee and get them to agree to continue treating Emilio. Now, they weren't happy about it, but they started to slowly realize the dangers of their mindset. And that was in February. And we weren't able to transfer Emilio because he was too sick, too unstable to go somewhere else. And because he'd become such a hot potato that no other facility wanted him because they knew his mom was going to go to CNN and La Raza and all these other organizations to win media attention. We don't normally like that, but in this case it helped protect Emilio, and Andrea Clark's family did the same thing, and that helped her. But Emilio died in May. And in retrospect, we think, why did this hospital? They knew he was sick. They knew he was going to die, and sooner than probably later. But why would they have gone to all that trouble to speed his death and endure such the bad press when this poor baby was probably not going to live much longer than 3 months? Why could they not have let the family stay at his bedside and nurture each other and nurture him and love him and be a support to him and be in peace instead of be tangled in this PR and legal battle? We had a patient, Kalila. She was 28 years old. She was pregnant, and she went to Memorial Hermann 3 times. 3 times, 28-year-old pregnant, in the Woodlands. They sent her home. 4th time she went back. My legs really are hurting. Can you please do something? Well, you know why her legs were hurting? She had an embolism, blood clot floating around. They never checked that the first 3 times. Well, then that blood clot landed in her lungs. She had a stroke, went unconscious. Then they took her to the hospital. Then they ran tests. They put, after her surgery to remove the embolism, Kalila, of course, was in critical care unit. Somehow she too became deprived of oxygen. She fell unconscious and was left brain damaged. They had called the mother in California and said, as soon as you come in town, we'll keep Kalila alive, but as soon as you come in town, we need to talk. So the mother asked for the medical records, we read them, and the notes were, can't do anything, too politically hot, mother coming in town, once we talk to her, we should be good. So they were counting on the mother coming into town and agreeing to kill Kalila. She lost the baby, of course, in all this because her blood clot went untreated. We were able to get a temporary restraining order from a judge, and the judge, it's a funny situation, but I won't bore you with that, but the judge just rolled his eyes and he said, can't y'all just get along, a little Rodney King action going there? And we said, well, we've been trying, we've been nice, they've been nice, and he said, okay, y'all need to talk twice a week. The caregivers, Right to Life, Kalila's family, the social worker. Y'all have a conference call twice a week. Well, what's interesting is when Kalila's mom was on the plane to Houston to come and fight for her life, the facility said, you're never going to be able to move her. We can't wean her from the ventilator. She's never going to be conscious. Well, on the first conference call, when the facility was thinking, oh my gosh, we're going to be stuck with this patient forever, so all of a sudden they began to care for her better so that more facilities would accept her. She'd be eligible to go to a higher level of care. Well, she's been weaned off the ventilator for 3 days and we're teaching her swallow therapy. So the policy that we've been advocating to change the Texas law is called treatment pending transfer. 11 other states have that law. And we've realized that when facilities are threatened or dread this idea of having to treat patients forever, which incidentally no one's ever been treated forever, we realize that the facility treats the patients better because they heal bed sores, they do swallow therapy, they wean people from ventilators, they stabilize their blood pressure. And the facilities take these extra measures so that a patient is eligible to be transferred more quickly into higher levels of care. But when a facility just says, well, I have to put them, I have 10 days and then we can be free of this patient, I'm not sure those are the words they use, but that's the outcome. When a facility realizes they only have 10 days, the care goes down remarkably. And that's a real threat. Jimmy Gibbons was a 58-year-old bus driver. He knew he had a heart condition. He'd had a heart condition his whole life. Drove himself to the ER because he knew, he could tell he was having pneumonia. He was having trouble breathing. He went to the ER, Baylor in Dallas, so if you get sick in Dallas, don't go to Baylor, take my word. If you get sick in Houston, don't go to Memorial Hermann, promise. And so Jimmy Gibbons, in the ER, they ignored his pneumonia. They said, no, it's your heart. He said, I do have a heart problem, but I'm telling you it's pneumonia. Ignored his pneumonia. His wife came in. Why aren't you treating his pneumonia? Well, it's his heart. Well, yes, but he has pneumonia. So, of course, if he has pneumonia, he's going to have trouble with his heart. But he has heart medicine. He's telling you it's pneumonia. He's 58. He kind of knows what pneumonia feels like now since he's lived with a heart problem his whole life. Would you please treat his pneumonia? No, we won't. Well, he fell unconscious because his lungs filled up. And he got really sick. So they started the 10 days. Called the family in. Started the 10 days, the family called us, and we called an attorney. And so the attorney, this is when we're one of our earlier cases, so we're a little new. The attorney went and met with the family, and the attorney said, we're trying to transfer the patient. And the attorney said, you're never going to, at the facility, you're never going to transfer. So we went to a judge. The judge, all a judge can do is give a temporary restraining order against the facility removing treatment. And the judges are only likely to do that if we can show a likelihood of moving the patient somewhere else. So in this case, the judge said you have more time, and we had to fight to get the 10-day letter revoked. We were able to move Jimmy Gibbons, not in the 10 days. We were able to move Jimmy Gibbons, I think, in about maybe 3 weeks. He went to a long-term rehab facility where he was walking and talking, and he was given physical therapy, and he could wheel his chair. When he wasn't able to walk on his own, he was in a wheelchair, and he used to wheel up to the nurse's station, and he would say, check on his girls and entertain the ladies. On the day Jimmy Gibbons died, his wife was with him in this long-term acute care facility and said, take my hand. I don't feel so good. And she said, her name's Patricia and the daughter's Kamisha, and their grandson has come to the Capitol to testify about this horrible ordeal that they as a family endured fighting for Jimmy's life. So Patricia took Jimmy's hand and said, let me go get the nurse. And he said, no, no, baby, it's my time. He thanked her for fighting for his life, and he died in peace. Had Baylor Dallas had their way, Jimmy Gibbons would have died in the midst of a legal battle of dehydration, starvation, full lungs, and probably a heart attack. A couple more stories. I have over 150, but I'll just spare you. I'll spare you the rest. These are all folks who are under 21. We heard Bishop Cressida talk about how valuable their organs are, especially if you're on this track to be a medal-winning Olympic swimmer. Had a skateboard accident, went to Memorial Hermann, left untreated with a brain swell, 8 hours, left in the ER. No one would care for this boy, but the first people who came to see the parents in the emergency room, guess who? Organ donation people. They had to fight them off 3 times, but they could not get a brain doctor in the room to stop the boy's brain from swelling. Same for Clint Weaver in Nacogdoches. He was riding his horse. Now, if you happen to be a semi-truck driver and there's a horse on the side of the road, don't blow your horn at a horse, because when that happens, the horse bucks and throws the guy on the horse off. Clint Weaver, same problem. The organ donation people were the first ones in the ER. Clint Weaver was 24, strong, strapping farm boy. Suffered major brain injuries, just like Joseph, the Olympic swimmer. When they would not acquiesce to donating organs, they started the 10 days. Lucky for those two, there was some legal stuff involved, and the attorneys were able to point out that it would be in the facility's best interest to not start the 10-day process or to revoke the 10-day process based on some medical mistakes that may have been made. The largest settlement that's been made in a medical malpractice case since tort reform was for Sabrina, a 15-year-old, a hotshot, young athlete, great student, was complaining of headaches. She had a staph infection that went to her brain. Went to the hospital because her brain was swelling, so they did surgery, took off a little part of her skull, and you know how they kind of leave the skull off so that the brain shrinks. Sabrina was put on an unmonitored floor after open brain surgery. Unmonitored floor, 15 years old, brain surgery. Well, Sabrina was left permanently disabled. Sabrina lived until this summer, and this was in 2006 when this accident happened, or when she went to the hospital for the staph infection. Oddly, the 10 days were started on Sabrina, and Sabrina's family called us and said, we don't know what's happening, y'all need to come over here. Memorial Hermann in Houston. So we went over there and we figured out what was happening, and only by God's grace did an attorney join us at that meeting, and the attorney recognized some gaps in the process that we were not trained to see. They could not start the 10 days. They were trying to start the 10 days. This hospital could not start the 10 days, and we were able to move Sabrina to Texas Children's, who did all types of therapy to rehabilitate her and then make her eligible to go to a long-term care facility in San Antonio. And her family has cared for Sabrina night and day, around the clock. In fact, her stepfather, quit his job to be the main care provider. We lost Sabrina this year, but their whole family was transformed and considered caring for Sabrina a joy, the joy of their lives. And they miss her to this day. They're not relieved that the burden of Sabrina was gone. They miss her. But the 10-day law robs that. The Texas law robs that joy of caring for our loved ones, no matter their age, race, or disability. We have helped all these families. Most of the families who call us for help are 10-day cases. Our patients have ranged in age from 4 years to 91. So you middle-aged guys are at risk. They've had all types of insurance, no insurance, lots of insurance, supplemental insurance, government insurance. So this is not discriminating against people who don't have insurance, except our experiences have been that they're the first ones on the plane. 20 of the folks we transferred lived a long time after the 10 days, after the 10 days started. Some of them have regained consciousness, and 6 of the ones we've transferred are still alive today. One of the reasons we have this problem in Texas and across the country is because the medical community is able to hide behind the vagueness of the terms. They're banking on the fact that you believe in death with dignity, that you think organ donors are dead. Organ donors are not dead. The medical community thinks that none of us would want to live like that. What did we see when Terry Schiavo's family was fighting for her life? We never saw the pictures of her smiling with her mom. We never saw the pictures of her face lighting up when her sister or her brother Bobby would go there, or when the Catholic priest would visit her. All we saw was her profile where she looked like she was out of it. Because of that, the medical community thinks we would never want to live like that. So they can throw around terms that are foreign and confusing to us. And they're banking on us not asking questions. Well, what does living on machines mean? We've seen Bishop Yonta on a wheelchair. Is that life-sustaining medical treatment? Some of us need glasses. Some of us take medicines every day. Does that mean we're disabled? We all need help in living. We do not need help in dying. The business of dying is up to our Creator. The term life support is often used. I stole that from Wesley Smith. The term life support is often used as a catch-all phrase for medical treatment, but I would urge you to be very careful, because what means life support at one hospital and to one doctor is different to what life support means at another hospital to another doctor. For me, life support is espresso, daily, hourly, all the time. To others, life support can mean a wheelchair or oxygen or asthma medicine. We have to ask questions. We have to know what we're talking about when doctors and medical folks throw these terms at us and make assumptions that are unfamiliar to us. Medical providers, now yes, there are pro-life physicians and pro-life nurses who are heroic and who protect the lives of people. But the ones who don't share our values do not like when we ask questions about what's happening. What medicine is that for? What are you doing? What time, will this happen? We have to be involved in the care of our loved ones. I want you all to know that because of this confusion, this is why Jahai McMath is back in the news. 30 sets of criteria for brain death have been published, and every one of these sets is less rigorous than the criteria before, and yet no one in the global medical community uses the same set. So we have all these sets of criteria for brain death, and yet there's no agreed upon criteria that is uniformly applied around the country or around the globe. So if this is the issue on brain death, you can imagine the differences in diagnoses when people are just sick and go to the hospital. And one of the reasons for the intentional lack of standards in all of this is the pharmaceutical industry, because the organ donation business is largely funded by the pharmaceutical industry, but it's also because we have put doctors on a pedestal for so long. We trust them without asking questions. And at one time, we had that luxury. But now, we don't have that luxury because there are so many variables in medical communities and in medical institutions, and the pro-life ethic is not the presiding variable. Most healthcare facilities will declare a patient dead when they consider him brain dead. And our hands have been tied a few times in helping patients because of such a diagnosis. So when we look for medical records or we ask the risk manager or the social worker at the facility, can you tell me what the needs are? Can you tell me what the patient needs so we can start calling places to transfer the patient? Well, he's dead. He's been declared dead. Well, it's really hard for us to try and transfer a patient who's been declared dead, whether or not we agree with that diagnosis. So we have seen patients be prematurely declared dead. So any declaration of death has to include the brain death and the cardiopulmonary aspect, which is what Bishop Cressida told us about this morning. People who have suffered brain damage or who appear non-responsive or in a coma or persistent vegetative state, please don't ever use those words, persistent vegetative state, that's just so inhumane. But again, these are dangerous non-specific terms. The safest labels are minimally conscious, unconscious, reduced consciousness, partially conscious. A more precise term is the quiescent brain, which is one of Bishop Cressida's terms. That means partly sleeping or sleeping. Many of the conscious patients are returned to full consciousness. And when a person is sleeping or quiescent, it is our duty to make sure that person is receiving all available, all life-sustaining medical treatment. There are so many stories of patients waking up, such as Jahai, but there are so many others. And the Catechism, section 2278, says that when these decisions are being considered, of course this is a paraphrase, the decision should be in the hands of the patients and the family, in consultation with the doctors. The decision should not be in the hands of the doctors in consultation with the families. The decision is the patients in consultation and guidance from the doctors. That is the order. The Texas law takes that right away from all of us. The arguments about distributive resources, we hear that a lot too. Well, what if we can't afford, or what if this? In America, that just doesn't happen. There's no clinical data, there are no studies, there are no statistics to show that some patients are denied treatment because other useless eaters are monopolizing the machines or medical resources. Maybe if you're in the backwoods of Africa, you have to make decisions on where to spend your resources, but in America and most modernized countries, that is not an issue, and yet the battle is still ongoing, which is why we have these unpleasant fights in our legislatures, in our Congress, within our church leadership, and across the globe. What I would recommend to you is that you learn the fetal care policies of your local hospitals. Now, if you call and ask and say, what's your fetal care policy, they're going to hang up on you. But what you can ask for are written policies of what is given to you upon admission. So before any time you go to a hospital, especially if you know ahead of time, which is always a bonus, ask ahead of time what their policies on advanced directives are. Make sure your wishes are known, and make sure that your doctor knows your wishes. I would recommend in Texas that you use the Will to Live, which is a pro-life advance directive. That's on our website, texasrighttolife.com. National Right to Life has pro-life wills to live on their website for every state. It's a legal document. And the Will to Live is the pro-life alternative to the living will. Any other advance directive document, whether it's MOST or POLST, those are abbreviations for some other advance directives, all of those assume that you don't want care. The language is presumptuous that you don't want care. So I would urge you to use the Will to Live, and that's on our website. Please keep in mind that death with dignity is a myth. We live our lives through dignified acts, through loving and caring for each other, through showing the gospel. Was it St. Francis who said, share the gospel at all times and when necessary use words? We can share the gospel by treating our dying and disabled loved ones with the love and the patience they so deserve. So we live our lives with dignity. We do not inject dignity into the veins of dying patients when they are struggling to take their last breaths. And as believers here in this room, I would urge you, when you're thinking about death with dignity for yourself or your loved one, reflect upon the death of our Savior on the cross. He was bleeding. He was in writhing pain. He had to carry a burdensome cross through the crowd of people who three days prior were following him. They rejected him, they spat upon him, they called him names. He bled and suffered publicly for us. Why would we, as sinners, be entitled to any more dignified death than our Lord Savior? Question. I'll try to be quick because I know we're cutting into the next guy's time. Trevor?
Alyssa, could you just give us an update? Looking today, the election obviously hasn't occurred, but what do you expect for treatment and transfer legislation in the next legislature? What would you expect based on changes of the primaries?
That's a great question, Trevor. Thank you. So, since 2007, Texas Right to Life has been trying to change the law to treatment pending transfer. And I just want to ask, are we recording here and in the back on the pink phone? Okay, can we just go with the official recording here? Okay. And so, Trevor asked about efforts to change the law in 2007. And so, since in the legislature, and we've been trying to change the law since 2007. And so when Texas Right to Life screens candidates and helps people win their elections, we make sure that candidates share our views and our values on all the life issues, including funding away from the abortion industry, the personhood of human embryos, and how we care for the dying and the disabled. And we expect from our elected officials and the people we endorse for office that they would share our commitment to reforming the Texas Advanced Directive Law. And the recent primaries have yielded very strong pro-life majorities, even stronger than we've had in the past in the State House and the State Senate. In the State Senate, we ran against two Republican establishment senators because they voted for a bill last session that would have expanded euthanasia. Sadly, the bill was marketed as an improvement over current law. It was supported by a group in Austin, but the major statewide pro-life organizations and 17 other national organizations shared our position, and we were able to stop that law. The answer to Trevor's question is because of this very tragic misinformation by some on how to appropriately reform the law, we have strengthened our efforts in helping recruit candidates who share our goal of treatment pending transfer. And we should have 8 new senators in the next state senate, which is a tremendous improvement. Yes. Many of the Democrats who vote pro-life on our issues understand that this is an issue of civil liberties and a way to speak up for the underdog who's in a hospital. So we do carry some Democrats on this issue. And the new House members going into the state legislature, who we've endorsed, also share our position. The Texas Medical Association, the Hospital Association, and some in church leadership oppose our position because they own hospitals, and we think that some of the folks in the Capitol have given them misinformation. But that was a long way to tell you that we think our chances of reforming the law are stronger than ever, and we probably are not going to back down from pushing for treatment pending transfer. because sadly, we have more families than ever who have endured this horrendous process in Texas and are going to come to the Capitol and make sure that their voice is heard. One more question, and I promise I'll be really quick. I know you don't believe that, but I will.
It's not so much a question, but some of us have had some of these experiences as well. I think we all have to realize that we need to have an advocate when we go to the hospital or with a doctor at all times. And the other thing, politically, we are finding out that the way to get a law made is to be vague. So that's how everything is vague. So they can put it up one way or discuss it, and they still can come out with their answer. And some of these laws we did fight years ago in our legislature in Texas. And there was a wonderful man, even though it went to the committee, and the committee wanted to have an euthanasia bill. It went to a wonderful man named Talmadge Heflin years ago. And you know what he did? He put it on the calendars. So it never got there. So we didn't have some of these things years ago, even though they were brought up. Well, thank you for what you're doing. You're pretty wonderful.
Well, I might need to put you in my hip pocket when I'm in the Capitol to say that, because not many people would agree with you, but thank you nonetheless. Two comments. One is, when Texas Right to Life spearheads a bill and writes a bill, we do spearhead the pro-life agenda for the Capitol. So we write all the bills, and most of them are written by your 3 o'clock speaker, who wrote the plan to defund the abortion industry as well as the sonogram law. His name's John Seago, but you'll hear from him in a little bit. We are very specific. We like no I undotted or T uncrossed. So we try to put everything as specific as we can in our bills, because we don't like agencies deciding how to implement our bills when there's a question on what was intended by the legislature. So yes, what you brought up as far as vagueness in policy and law is a problem. We try to go around that. The second part about Talmadge Heflin, I'm familiar with Talmadge Heflin because he is a hard-right evangelical pro-lifer, and he has taken many daggers for the pro-life cause over the years. He's now at a think tank and a policymaker and helps us on budget issues in other ways. I'm not familiar with the bill you're talking about, but I can tell you that Talmadge Heflin would never have sat on a pro-life bill. He is a friend and has been an ally for a long time to the cause.
That was a friendly thing he did. He never allowed it to come to be voted on.
Oh, great. So yes.
And it was just lost.
Yes, that's one way some of our pro-lifers help us, is to sit on anti-life bills and never let them see the light of day, which is also a very effective tool. Thank you all very much. We'll be back this afternoon.